Hey, welcome to Feedback episode 45. We have made it to middle age with this series now. And today we're really excited to be joined by composer and electronic musician Marcus Schmickler and Andrew Fenchel, executive director of Lampo Arts in Chicago. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about a piece that Marcus wrote for Yarnwire in 2014, I believe. It's called Fokker Bifurcations. The piece was released on record this last July, and I'm really excited to revisit it with you all and chat about that experience and the music. So thanks for joining us. And with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew. Oh, I forgot one thing. If anyone has any questions during this broadcast, please feel free to join us in the chat on YouTube and Facebook. Or you can always email us at feedback@yarnwire.org. All right. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Hi. Hi. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Nice to see you all. Marcus, it's been some time. You're looking well.
Thank you.
So it makes sense to begin with the origins of the project. Excuse me. Everyone in Yarnwire, you are also looking well.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I was wondering.
It makes sense to begin with how you all got together, but I'd like to take a half step back further in time, if you can remember back then, because I'm curious about what you might have known of each other's music before you came in contact. So, Marcus, I'll start with you. How familiar were you with Yarnwire before you even got together?
Well, first of all, thanks, Yarnwire, for having me here on your show. It's a great thing that you do. I've seen a couple of episodes and I really enjoy this project. So thanks for having me here. Well, to be honest, I didn't know Yarnwire in 2014. It came a little bit as a surprise when Lawrence Kampf, the curator from Issue Project Room, called me and suggested if I wanted to participate in a performance at Issue Project Room that included that I could write a piece for Yarnwire. And so he told me about how great they are and what a wonderful ensemble it is and so on. So, but that was a kind of a new discovery for me by then.
And for Yarnwire, anyone who wants to take this, how familiar were you with Marcus's music before you came in contact?
I think pretty much the same, actually. Yeah. It was like kind of out of the blue, an unexpected surprise and pleasure. I mean, since then, I think all of us have checked out Marcus's work, but at the time it was like, yeah, why not? This sounds great.
So then, did you have a conversation once the matchmaking, happened? Did you have a conversation initially to talk about what you would do together?
It kind of developed, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, Marcus, there were like some email exchanges kind of, but then I think maybe more to do with the technology that we were going to use, and what we could do. But there wasn't too much back and forth, just like introductions, it was a little awkward dating. No, I'm just kidding. But we just kind of then worked with Marcus when he came to town to rehearse the piece. I think you sent it to us, and then we tried it and we rehearsed. So yeah, it was like via email, kind of like how everything is now. These virtual connections.
Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, Marcus, were you going to say something?
Yeah, it's actually quite unusual, I would say, that that we didn't really rehearse anything or did tests or anything beforehand. Basically, I just figured out what type of ensemble it is, and I had instant ideas what I wanted to try with them, and then I just wrote a piece and sent it to them. So that was quite unusual, actually.
There's one thing I forgot, since we're talking about the origins. Marcus and I did meet up at Darmstadt. Do you remember that?
I do.
We did meet up. I don't know if we talked too much about the music or anything, but we got to like meet each other, and I'm sure we talked about the piece and stuff. But yeah, we met over there.
So that was in between the time that the process started, but before you saw the piece.
Yeah.
So Marcus, did you collect recordings of Yarnwire to listen to what they play as you're starting to work on your process, or you purposely not listening to what they do?
To be honest, I can't recall that completely. I'm not sure if I got recordings of theirs, or how I developed a feeling for who they are, what they are specialized in, really. But it was also for me a kind of special time. The time when between when they asked me to do it and when I actually delivered the piece, because I was moving from living for some time in the US in Los Angeles, because I was involved with CalArts for some time, and then I had like a pretty intense commission work with for WDR that also brought some ideas for the piece that I actually did for Yarnwire then, and then I took it from there without lots of detail information what they is particularly good at or so, which is thinking about it today is kind of really special, but that's the way it went.
Risky.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Well, we had a chat with. Oh, sorry, Marcus. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
We had a chat a couple weeks ago with Raphael Chendo, and he mentioned, I think it's somewhat similar, like when a proposal to write a piece was sent to him, he like had this very fast, kind of immediate constellation of ideas appear. And I'm wondering if it was, it sounds like a similar.
Yeah, it's a similar thing. It's a little bit, you could say, risky, but I had like, the idea about tuning systems versus equal temperament, pitch percussion and so on. That was something that I had in mind from the very start. And at the same time, I don't know if it's a gut feeling or what, but I thought, okay, I guess they must be very good. So I just throw something at them, and I'm sure they will come up with something. That's also, something that you rarely, or that I rarely would do. But for some reason, I just had a feeling, yeah, let's see what they come up with. So it's a little bit of a challenge also for you guys. But I would do it differently in another round.
Yeah.
When you delivered the piece, was there any kind of supplemental information that you shared about it, or was it just kind of like, here it is, November?
Well, I sent them a score, or I sent them parts for the score with instructions about how the instruments should be used, because it involves microtonal keyboards, and I sent them instructions how to set up what I thought which kind of instruments they should work with, and so on. So that was like extra information that went out. And I can't remember how we figured out the exact instrumentation for the percussion, but the main concern was the keyboard instruments and their technical details and so on, and the other stuff. I mean, the other questions, I thought we would be able to fix while we're rehearsing the piece together, because we had something like 4 days or so. Can't remember exactly, but which is quite a solid basis for diving into it and exploring the material and trying to figure out how to play it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, it's probably a good point to dive into the piece, but before we do, I thought I should mention that the recording that came out in July is an edit of the performance. It's about it's 18 minutes or so, mm-hmm. compared to about 30 minutes of the performance. Mm-hmm. So we'll come back and talk about that later. But before we listen, just one thing that I have to clear up about the title. So is it bifurcation or is it bifurcations? And is the difference just a typo, or is it does it have something to do with the edit?
Mm-hmm. It's bifurcations, and it's a typo, I guess. So the title of the piece is Fokker Bifurcations.
Okay, and so I know of your interest in science, and particularly physics. So can you answer why Fokker without talking at all about science or physics, please?
Well, first of all, I should maybe say that how you come to a title and how you invent or choose a title for how you come up with a title is a story for itself. But here, Fokker, as you probably know, he was a physicist and inventor in the 20th century, and he, with his 31 tone equal temperament system that he kind of reinvented, or he came up with, he laid the basis for a lot of the tuning systematics within the 20th century, including Harry Parch's system and so on. So I thought, since for me, I consider myself still like a beginner in the field of tuning systems, I thought it would be a nice reference to come up with someone so foundational. You know, the bifurcation is kind of twisting or stopping the equilibrium within a stable system. So that was the kind of metaphor or the idea for the piece.
All right. So in addition to your interest in physics, I know also you're very interested in language and music, the correlation between the two, or language as music. And as someone who's not an expert in music, when I look at the score, I noted the parts that I could read. There's certain directions within the score to play, I guess, like speech articulation. So we have a section for the beginning of the recording. It's about 1 minute in. We'll listen to that and we'll look at the score. You can see where this direction appears, and then we'll talk about it on the other side. So we'll ask Marcus too, but Laura, what do you remember when you saw that for the first time, and what did you think Marcus had in mind?
Well, so I think the first thing in a piece like this, even before the sort of the particular indication you're talking about, is that sort of dissociation when you're learning it, because you have to learn it without the tuning. You have to learn it on a regular old piano. And that is always, that what you hear is not what you're going to hear. And so it's a little bit of a sort of strange learning process. I think, it wasn't the first time we'd done it, and I'm sure it won't be the last, but it is definitely, it's sort of hard to really get inside the piece until you're like fully rehearsing. But I think that a lot of times this type of notation where you have really complex rhythmic notation, but then an indication that somehow it's also mimicking something that is spontaneous and natural. It's very interesting because it shows that how imprecise musical notation is. The more precise it gets, sometimes the more imprecise it can feel to an interpreter. But it's really, I love that challenge in working on a piece like that.
And Marcus, what were you hearing when you wrote like speech?
Well, maybe I should make a little detour to explain that, because I mentioned earlier, while I was writing the piece for Jan, I was working on a piece for WDR that was dealing with linguistics and with grammar and specific type of grammar, kinogrammar. So I was interested in a relationship between language and voice, or language and speech, and did really a lot of research about the subject, and it kind of took over that kind of learning process, and I kind of spent a year on just dealing with trying to figure out sonifications of certain types of formal systems related to language, semiotics and generative grammar and polycontextuality and things like that. And in that context, I stumbled upon a paradigm from the 1970s, which is called sine wave speech, which is a perceptual paradigm that kind of reduces, or that tries to prove that, or that claims that you can have a speech intelligibility if you add up only the first, like the fundamental frequency of the speech plus two further formants within the language, if that makes sense. So the voice usually has a huge spectrum of all kinds of parts within the frequencies domain, and the reduction on a base frequency plus two formant frequencies is like an immense reduction. And I was trying to figure out how I could reproduce that with instruments rather than with a computer and an analysis of an audio signal. So for this other piece that I wrote, semiotic Cora, Sprachlabor, it's called, that I did for WDR, I had like saxophones, settings of trying to reproduce that kind of phenomenon. And I thought, basically, I tried to throw it at Jahnweier as well. So what we hear, or what we see also in the score, is kind of a computer-generated material. Hence, it looks also quite strange and unmusical, if you want. But I thought, well, these genius musicians, I'd be curious what they make out of it. And I was really very surprised that that there were no questions about it. They just did it, and they kind of did it the way I expected it, and that was really the biggest miracle for me.
The questions come before rehearsal, Marcus, before you step in the room. Yeah. Like, what is this? What? No, I'm just kidding.
Talk among the four of you about the piece. I mean, do you remember what kind of conversations you might have had before Marcus came to town?
I mean, I think, there is, I guess there is that what I was mentioning before about, when you get this super complex, super precise notation, sometimes composers have a different intention behind that. Like some intend it in a way as Marcus did, which is, yes, it's hyper precise. Yes, it should be played this way, but the effect should be of this sort of more natural, spontaneous kind of result. And some composers are like, well, it's just a contour. It's just, you're kind of floating in this like space, and do something like that, but it's okay if you don't play it. And some composers are like, absolutely no, it has to be, hyper lined up, geometrically arranged in time. So I think it was just sort of trying to understand sort of where on the spectrum exactly we should fall in that way.
I also remember it was a logistical challenge. Because I think this was before almost anyone played with iPads, and the score was rather big. Not only like were the pages large, if I remember correctly, like of the score, but it's long. It's a really big piece. And so that, just being able to play it, being able to figure out page turns and what am I looking at, there were a lot of things that we had to kind of tackle. And then, once you finally play through the whole thing, you're like, oh, okay. You start understanding what it is. But it took a while for me personally, I think, to get all my pages set and simple logistic things.
Yeah. I think also that we kind of knew, or like something about the score engraving that we received, it implied that it was like generated maybe extra from some process or extracted from some model, which I think also implies to us maybe an interpretive starting point.
Yeah, strategy or
at
something.
least.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good way of putting it.
So then someone said that you had 4 days to work on it together, which sounds like it was an unusually maybe luxurious amount of time to work it out. So do you recall much about the evolution in the piece, or how you thought about it, or your approach changed over time? And Marcus, did you reconsider the piece as you started to hear it being played?
Well, I guess as I mentioned earlier, I was really kind of secretly super impressed how they what they made out of the score that I sent to them, because it was basically, I wouldn't have imagined that no questions asked. They just, put it like it is, like I had it in mind, basically. But there were obstacles despite, there are obstacles with page turns and how to organize the actual performance from my perspective, there was concerns with how do we make it sound properly in the space, and because acoustically, Issue Project Room is quite special somehow. There's a lot of reverb and a lot of room, which can be nice. But I had, for some reason, I thought, well, I know it can be a difficult space for its features if you have like dry sound in mind. But let's see what we can do with it. Let's see how we can work with it, and that's something that I really like doing in rehearsals. If there's time for it, it's something that I'm really keen on, finding ways to make the room, make it resonate with the room somehow, and find a proper setup for the instruments, and because it was also amplified, of course, the keys, it needed a proper setting of that kind of sort. Plus, there was also a set that I did on the same night with computer music, which involved, I can't remember, like a multi-channel speaker, if it was a 6-channel or quad, I'm not sure anymore. But so we had also this kind of contrast between entirely different worlds that also needed to make an interesting contrast between, presenting a computer music piece and also an instrumental work.
Let's talk about where those worlds come together for you, because in a lot of the work of yours that I'm familiar with, there's this common feature, which I guess is the musical terminology is glissando. It's a continually rising series of pitches that sound like it's going up, but could also sound like it's going down. And it's maybe not the same thing as what's called a shepherd's tone, but you've spoken to me before about your interest in that audio illusion. So let's listen to a familiar example of a shepherd's tone, and then let's go immediately into the next excerpt from the piece, which comes at about midway through the recording, about 8 minutes in. I like the way that the tension builds and then breaks apart like that. Can you, Marcus, just start us off and speak to your interest in this type of sound? Is that the way to refer to it? Why is it such a often kind of recurring thing that I hear in your music?
Well, maybe first of all, I should say that these kind of glissandi could be seen as a continuum of some uninterrupted process, if you wish. But keyboards, or like any kind of tuning systems, are by definition already a kind of a lattice or something that is discontinuous in a way, that there's always kind of gaps between those tones. So this piece also deals with these kind of transformations or juxtapositions of these lattices and the continua, and yes, and that's something that I'm interested in for a long time in some way. I mean, these auditory illusions, since you brought up the shepherd tone or the Super Mario thing, that's actually quite funny to see that here. but I think it's fun to do for some reason. I mean, for me to hear, and maybe it's even a bit simple, but who says that something that is fun is not should not be done? So I really enjoy these kind of elements, but more seriously, these kind of auditory illusions or so, they basically just broaden the palette of a composer, I guess, or for me, since usually you deal with there's a limit somewhere of a pitch, and there's a lower and an upper limit, and if you kind of try to get rid of these limits, then you have a broader way of dealing with that. But I could bring another example for an auditory illusion that I'm also work with every once in a while, which is like the combination tone or combination tones in general, which appear basically in the ear of the listeners, and although they are not implicit in the score as something that written out, the use of these kind of things, of such a phenomenon as an ear tone or as a psychoacoustic phenomenon, broadens also a palette of spatial arrangement of music, because this kind of ear tones are placed in the audience's heads, basically, because the cochlea produces those sounds. So if you work with spatialized sound, or you think about how to arrange sound in space, maybe even about distances and so on, then you have a larger contrast if you play with these kind of elements. If you play a sound inside the head of a listener, and then you juxtapose that to some sound that is far away or coming from a remote distance.
Can you achieve that kind of effect with acoustic instruments, or only with computer or electronics?
Well, maybe the musicians should answer that, but of course, Tartini was he was a violinist who discovered those tones, who was one of the first people to write about these tones in the 18th century. So basically, they're coming from, you hear them in voices, you hear them, in more in high-pitched instruments rather than low-pitched instruments. But yeah, these
definitely. Yeah. I mean, I know on vibraphone, they're like very, very noticeable in the kind of upper to middle ranges.
Glockenspiel too.
Crotale?
Glockenspiel, sometimes you don't even know what note if you're playing the instrument, it's sometimes hard to hear the notes that you're playing, and you just hear the difference tones. They're that strong.
Yeah.
And crotales too, but more so Glockenspiel, I feel like. I can feel them now. Even without
you feel that
instrument.
That buzz.
Yeah.
Which brings up I think a great subject as well, which is the relation between tuning and the timbre qualities of an instrument, right? So also there that can be seen as a continuum, because when you work with different types of tunings, then you always have to think about how the timbre qualities of the instrument actually fit with that, or how you balance or arrange these kind of timbres. So I would say it's basically also a kind of continuum between timbre and pitch. Well, actually, it's William Citharis who figured that continuum, but it's something that I'm quite convinced of, that that's an interesting subject somehow to navigate between timbre and pitch systems.
Totally. I like what you said about putting it in someone's head, because when I'm just thinking about glockenspiel again, you know, if I'm listening to someone play glockenspiel from an audience, sometimes I don't hear those same difference tones. But when you're playing it, you do hear it. So, you know, the spatialized thing, you know, that you're mentioning, it's almost, I don't know how to really think about it, but, you know, you never know if someone else is hearing those same tones, or if you're just experiencing them.
Yeah. What is it like to be playing inside this extended glissandi? Like, is it kind of a giddy feeling? How would you describe it? Is it fun?
Yeah.
It's like, it kind of feels like somebody's like got you by the shirt collar and is just sort of slowly pulling you higher and higher. It's like, it's this really cool feeling of like a very long sustained amount of tension.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds electronic. I mean, to my kind of lay ear, is that what you're going for also, Marcus, trying to achieve some kind of electronic sound?
No, not really. I wouldn't say I'm interested in reproducing electronic sounds with instruments. I'd rather prefer to bring up the acoustic qualities of the instruments, and do electronic music, you know, with electronics and computer. But since Laura mentioned her experience, I think it's also, there's some maybe, I don't say, some didactical, do you say that? Didactic idea within that, because when I perform these kind of things with in electronic scenarios, then people who are not necessarily familiar with or interested in experimental music at all, they would just recognize that there's something going on that they find interesting or so. And I kind of hope that this also transforms to more experimental, this experience, you know, generates like a curiosity for, you know, other stuff that is there.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too, because, you know, even though we're playing keyboards, the sound, the actual timbral sound is still an acoustic grand piano. And it's just the tuning systems, I think, because we're so used to hearing that timbre as equal temperament. It sounds so alien. It sounds electronic because there are very few Western instruments that just so precisely produce all of these alternate tunings. And they change throughout the piece too. It's never totally fixed. So you always feel this kind of instability.
But that's actually one of the things that I had the most, how to say, pain in the gut, or no, like I was most insecure about is, you know, asking you guys to play keyboards, because I know that it must be kind of very unrewarding to have not the sound of your instrument, but rather, you know, a boxed version of your instrument. That must be, I was aware that this is kind of a tricky, you know, thing to ask you to do. But I'd be curious how you deal with it, and what solution, you know, we can come up with in general, to use, you know, all kinds of instruments. The piano is the hardest part, but even for the percussion, I mean, it's amazing how percussion players come up with new instruments every once in a while because they need it for specific tuning and so on. I find that really remarkable, and that's a riddle for me. What the best way to approach these kind of things is. I mean, other composers work with, very different pianos, like acoustic pianos that have various tunings and so on. But that's also kind of a tricky thing to do, I guess, especially if you want to take this to other places and so on.
Yeah, unless that piano always stays in that tuning, pianos don't like it. They rebel against it. It's such a complex piece of machinery, the piano. It's not flexible in some ways, as flexible as we force it to be in a lot of the music we play. But yeah, tuning, I think, is that especially in terms of tuning, it wants to be the way it's designed to be, and to have changing tunings for an acoustic piano, you'd have to have, a room full of different pianos tuned in different systems, which would be awesome, but probably not very practical.
Did it feel good to play? Like, I mean, you're playing a MIDI keyboard, right?
Yeah.
That's how the sound is generated. Like, have you found certain MIDI keyboards feel more satisfying than others? Like certain software, like are there solutions to?
Yeah, I think, the more that now you can get like these digital weighted keyboards. So the more sort of piano-like the action feels, the easier it is to control, because, playing the piano is a muscular venture. You need your arms and your back and your legs and your bottom and all of that. And so it's very different than, like harpsichord, which is much more digital and lower arm based. So, if I'm going to play something that's meant to be for piano, I need something that feels like a piano. And then, yeah, definitely, I think the software, in fact, that we use for this piece, it's called Piano Tech with a Q. It has really, really incredible quality piano sounds, actually. So from Steinway, New York Steinway, Hamburg Steinway, Bosendorfer, all ranges of things, and you can manipulate those tunings pretty easily. I think we were just using like a cursor key to sort of dial through them in this piece. And so far that seems to be the sort of most satisfying solution. Not that others couldn't exist, but it's really fun because, yeah, like the piano usually, like I said, in terms of tuning, it's so inflexible. So it's really satisfying then to sit down and hear this come out of your fingers. Essentially, it's nice. It's a good adventure to be on.
Maybe I have a brief follow-up question to that. If you that brings us to an earlier topic of the Fokker organ, the 31 tone equal temperament, which has the keyboard layout has a horizontal domain as the acoustic piano, but it also has a vertical domain, so you can choose qualities of thirds and so on. It's organized in lattices, I guess, as well, but you have like a two-dimensional space, a three-dimensional space, I should say, which makes it a different thing. Can you, as a pianist, adjust to such a different type of keyboard layout easily, or is that something that needs lots of preparation? I mean, it's probably also depending on how difficult the challenge is. But
I think that's the key, is how complex is what I'm trying to play, because, even just between moving, like I can't really play the organ. Like, I'm not an organist. I played in a church for many years, and they were like, "Can you just play a little bit of organ every now and then?" And I said, "Well, as long as the hymn only has 3 chords, I'm cool." Because if more than that, my feet can't keep up. And the same with harpsichord. I studied harpsichord and forte piano a bit when I was in graduate school, but those are very different instruments. And as long as the music I'm playing is not so terribly complex, I feel like I can do a pretty respectable, educated pianist job of playing those instruments, but I would never sell myself as a harpsichordist or as an organist. So yeah, I think it really depends on how complex it would be. I would love to try it.
They need to make a multi-manual piano.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy.
That would be amazing. Just leave me in a room for a few days.
The Bacher piece for a second and ask the array of percussion in the piece that Marcus planned for originally, the same array that you played, or did you make some adjustments as you were rehearsing?
I don't think it was specified at first, was it?
I mean, the drums, they were not. I'm not sure if they were specified in pitch. I can't remember right now. I don't think so. No, there was no clear instruction. It was just the pitched percussion like marimba and vibraphone. But the drums, I'm not sure if the wood blocks had pitches in them.
I don't think so. I think we probably worked on that with you in the studio. Like, we kind of knew maybe the sound world, and then we chose them in rehearsal. That seems about right to me.
Yep.
Is there a usual setup or staging in the space at issue that you used, or how did you set the four of you up to achieve what Marcus and the four of you had worked out? Do you remember?
We always set up so we could see each other. That is first and foremost, chamber music thing. Did we do this in the round?
I think we did it.
We did.
Were in the middle of the room. Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like I remember that.
And actually, the keyboards make it a lot easier.
They do.
It makes our setup way better. I mean,
That's true.
in terms of just like we can be
Spit size.
close
Yeah.
to each other.
Yeah. That was
Usually
cool.
the pianos are huge.
Yeah.
But
We were kind of a nested thing, I think, looking at each other. Communication was actually, the marimba was the biggest problem because all of a sudden it became the biggest instrument. But Issue Project Room always presented, I don't want to characterize them as negative, but they're challenges, because of a couple things. They're the resonant space that Marcus was talking about. If you go from a drier rehearsal space to this super resonant place, you have to change the way you're playing. But also, it's so visually interesting and stunning that, and the lighting during that time was often very dramatic. And so, it was, you have this opportunity to make it something visually really special too. And so I think that might be one of the reasons why we did it kind of in the middle, is because it felt like there was no proper front to the piece. In some chamber music, there's like, okay, there's the left side, there's the right side. But this music with all these processes and all this stuff, there's no proper orientation. So I think as an audience member, it'd be really interesting to sit in different spots and hear, some instruments be louder than others. And I think that flexibility was pretty cool.
Well, I want to have us listen to the ending. But first I wanted to ask and come back to this idea of the edit for the recording. So it's a pretty significant edit by a percentage. I mean, you went from about 30 minutes down to 18. And you said by email that was because of the limits of the CD or audience attention span. But I don't know if I believe either one of those is in fact the reason. So can you just talk about why this length or what you removed from the performance to make this finished edit? And when we listen to the ending, is it the ending as performed, or is it an ending that you constructed with the recording?
The ending is the way it was performed. And they had I remember that they offered various ways of how they could play the last couple of notes in the piece, and they were there was a huge difference in there, and I was quite impressed how they by the choices that I had, particularly for the ending. But to come back to your earlier question, well, I guess composers always like what they write, right? So, which is maybe not always the case for the audience. So you think I wrote a 30-minute long piece and it's fantastic, but I was not sure what the audience would think about it, and I had the gut to say like, oh, let me just make it quite without thinking too much about it, like structurally, how I would do it, but just in a rather, almost improvisational kind of way, see what, because a recording is a recording. It's not the piece itself. If you want a proper performance, once you start getting into the editing and maybe even the mixing, then you are already in a different domain than writing the piece. And then I thought I can approach it quite radically, and just make sure that it's not too long for an audience. Basically, if it was me, I would have left it in the original way. Not that anyone would have told me that I should make it shorter, but well, actually, what I told you previous to our conversation, it's actually true. I had to figure out a way that maybe it's too short even now. I'm not sure, but it is what it is. It's a different version, and and I like having different versions of pieces. Also, when I'm there, when there's a performance happening of a piece of mine, I also think about rearranging, like spatial things where, put musicians or speakers in different places and so on. So once a piece is written, it's not necessarily entirely done. It's always, and every new iteration brings up a different result in a way, and I like that.
Well, let's listen to the last minute or minute and a half of the piece now.
Awesome.
I like the way it ends. It seems like it could actually just sort of keep going too. It feels like it's just about to take off again.
Yeah.
What is it like to? I don't know how you answer this, but it was quite a long time ago that you did this work. 6.5 years ago, but the recording is less than a year old. Can you talk about what it is to revisit something and think about something so long ago, but also have it be very present now? Do you sometimes when people look back on things that they've done in the past, they, as you said, they think about what they would do differently or change things. How happy are you with the work from 2014, and how do you think about it now looking back?
As an ensemble composer? Anyone?
Yes, Russell, personally.
Me personally? No. Okay, actually, yeah, me personally. I feel it's really nice to look back at a piece that was challenging I feel like, preparing for this talk, listening to the piece again, it sounds, it's filtered through all sorts of new experiences that I've had as a musician. And I think back to, it's real warm feelings, actually, thinking back to the rehearsals, to the meals, to the figuring it out, and the venue was still, before any kind of renovation and all that. So it was a real special time, I feel like, for the ensemble, and also a really unique opportunity. Like Ian said, or someone said, we didn't, Lawrence came to us with this idea, and that was a unique thing, and it turned out really amazing. So I'm looking back historically and feeling really, really happy about it. And then to have it so present, it's, when Marcus reached out and said, when you said you're gonna put this out, I was like, whoa, cool. That's so great. What an amazing surprise. And to have people hear it on such an amazing record, actually, that's great. So I'm happy it continues. In fact, I'm happy that performance continues its life, because that performance could have kind of disappeared, right? And here it has a new life. And, I think we should play this piece more. I say that with all these, with all these interviews, you listen back to these things, you're like, man, there's a lot of really cool stuff. And this is one of those pieces. So yeah, it's really neat.
Yeah. Well put.
Well, I wanted to join in this sort of retrospective look. And so the last image that I have to show, if you'd bring that up, is from, Marcus, this is from 2002 when you first came to Lampo for the that was the first time.
Wow.
And I love it. You look very serious amid the cinder blocks there. You've lightened up quite a bit since then.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
And in color.
Yes.
That was pre-color photography.
Yeah, that's how you know it's old.
Turn of the century.
Thank you all again for having us. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. I think that's all the time we have for today. So I want to thank Andrew, Marcus, for taking the time. It's really amazing to look back on it. We are taking next week off. Don't worry, everyone. We'll be back. But we're taking next week off, and we're going to be back on May 13th for a chat with John Arrigo Nelson and Ricardo Gallo, two composers who were colleagues of ours at Stony Brook University way back in the day. Remember to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any episodes. And if you feel like supporting this and our other projects, check us out on patreon.com. With that, I'll hope to see you all in the not too distant future. And thanks for joining us.
See ya.
Bye.